5.
Hello, everyone. I'm hoping you're having a great conference, and thank you so much for your patience while we sorted out our marvelous technical difficulties. I'm Lorraine Mockford, Lori Von Luster in Second Life, the Virtual World's Best Practices in Education's Communications Chair, and your Virtual Ability Incorporated transcriptionist. It is my pleasure to introduce our final keynote speaker of the conference, Dave Cormier. I had the pleasure of knowing Dave for about 4 years, but as with many virtual connections, we've only met in person once at a conference in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Dave Cormier, or Courcell Oracle here in Second Life, is an educational activist, researcher, online community advocate, and the manager of web communications and innovations at the University of Prince Edward Island, where I was an online student. He has published on open education, rhizomatic learning, MOOCs, massive open online courses, digital identity, and practical uses of virtual worlds. And I'm going to skip some bits. You can read it in the text and get to the good part, which are Dave's links to where you can follow him on Twitter and you can follow his blog, and I highly recommend that you do so. With no further ado, I give you my friend, Dave Cormier.
Hey folks, thanks for coming out. Thanks for staying in world here so we can get to this talk. I've been really looking forward to it. It's been a couple of weeks, really the last couple of weeks, of trying to think about how things have changed, since the last time I came into Second Life, and how MOOCs have really become such a big part of the work that I do, and how they speak to the future of education. This talk today is really about looking at the good sides and the bad sides of MOOCs. In some sense, I think people see it as the end, see it as the death of the personalization, the end of sort of that face-to-face stuff. To some degree, they see it as the end result of what happens with online learning, right? There's that sense where we just turn the whole thing over to the computer and we lose the things that for a lot of us is what makes education really great and really interesting. For others, we see the possibilities and the ways that it can go. This talk is really going to try to look at both of those things a little bit, take us from a historical view of how we've gotten here educationally, and then work through some of the different ways that people are using MOOCs, and talk about the real possibilities that are involved in them. So just to start out here, tell you a little bit about myself. My name in another life is Dave Cormier. I have the pleasure, I guess, of being the person who actually coined the word MOOC in 2008 during a course with two friends of mine, Stephen Downs and George Siemens, in a course called Connectivism and Connective Knowledge. And it was really in a response to something crazy that happened in that course. They had a course at the University of Manitoba. They had 25 people registered, and they said, what would be really fun? Let's just open this course up and let anybody come in and play with us. Let's let the community totally inside of this thing. They thought, maybe 60 or 70 people would show up, and 2,300 people registered. And as that happened, as that transition started to happen, as more and more people were talking about it, as more and more those changes were happening, it almost seemed like there was something else that we needed to call it, like there was something else happening, in a sense, like the internet was happening to education itself. So for me, that work with MOOCs has been a big chunk of the work I've done for the last 5 years. I've also been involved in a lot of different online communities, and I'm really passionate about the possibilities of community as learning. Right? So my participation in a variety of online learning communities here in SL a few years ago, but also online with a group of people called EdTech Talk, where we would get together every week and talk. And I realized that just being part of that community, being a member in that community, interacting with those people, was the learning that I was doing. So I come at this partially as somebody who is interested in education and technology. I come at this partially as somebody who works in a university and is interested in the possibilities of the university. And I also come at this as somebody who is very interested in the idea of community as well. So for us to get started here, we're going to talk about three broad things during this talk today. And feel free to drop questions in the chat room. I've got it up here. I should be able to interact, to listen to what you guys are saying, and feel free to pop questions in and stuff. I should be able to do that. The first one is a journey through history, right? We're going to start with Socrates and come our way forward, talking about the different ways in which education has been part of our culture. We'll move on to look at xmoocs, which is one of the ways in which people see MOOCs, and talk about some of the things some of the possibilities there. And then the last part of it, we'll go ahead and talk about cmoocs, about community, and about creating a sense of space and how important that is to the learning process. So to start with that historical context, and we're going all the way back here. We're going to start, this is the death of Socrates, the painting. And when you look at education, 2,500 years ago, when you look at that time before text, before really the regular everyday things we were doing were involved with text, before we took the things that were important to us and wrote them down and passed them around, before we finalized ideas in that way, we end up with an oral culture where when the process of learning is very much, it's discursive. I talk to you, we work through the ideas, and we move ourselves forward. The examples, and there aren't very many, but the examples that we have from that time period of people learning stuff, they go off to meet with somebody, they talk to them for a day or a week or a month or 6 months, and they come back different. They don't come back with a set of learning objectives that they went out to do. They come back changed in some way or other. And that change is very much a human process, and very much about being able to find very specific humans, right? And that really limits the possibilities in terms of people's ability to find people to learn from, and it makes those people incredibly valuable, right? If you're Molin on Rhodes, who was a famous rhetorician, that guy was like, he was the most important person for a lot of people. He was the one who trained Cicero and Caesar in their abilities to speak, to do rhetoric in Rome. So at that point, when we look at the oral culture and we look at oral learning, people are very much the center of it. Things are flexible, they're mutable, they're not definite. Socrates famously said in the Phaedro that he hated writing, and he hated the idea of writing, because once you took an idea, once you take an idea and write it down, it can no longer defend itself. It can no longer answer back. It can't grow. It's finished. It's written down. It's over. When you print it, well, not print it 2,500 years ago, when you write it down, it's a fait accompli, right? So for him, that was really a step down from the ability to do it discursively. When we take a step forward, this is my daughter. You can all say, wow, isn't she cute? When you look at that classroom that comes, let's go forward 1,500 years, say, in which you've got, particularly in the West, particularly when we talk about Europe, and even here in Canada, we talk about Europe first in a lot of ways, for which I apologize for those of you who are not from North America or from Europe. When we look at that, what we've got is a far more controlled learning space. It's really about going in and learning about the ancients as they were written down, sometimes written down long after the fact. So the learning process was really far more about memorizing the truth, the book, the word, the definite, and taking that out with you. Because it's not like you had scraps of paper or a notebook or those things. So really, for the vast majority of people, the only way they were leaving a classroom with information was to store it in their heads. And in a lot of that stuff, it was catechetical. It was call and repeat. So I say this thing that you need to commit to memory because it's the only way you're ever going to have it. And you put it in your memory so you can walk away and have it when you leave. Right? This catechetical approach is a fundamental effect on how we look at knowledge, how we look at talking to each other. So what it meant to be learned 2,500 years ago is very different than what it meant to be learned 1,500 years later. If we go forward again, after the printing press, when we look at the changes that the printing press brought in and the possibilities that came there, my favorite example is in Switzerland in 1795 or so. A guy named Pestalozzi decided he wanted to teach the entire country how to read. You think about the challenge of that. It's mind-breaking, right? You have an entire country, you have a small, limited number of people who are literate currently, and you have nobody who is accustomed to teaching people who are literate how to be literate. So you don't really have teachers, or at least enough of them for the vastness of that product. So what he went about doing was trying to build what we now call a textbook. So he would take the ideas and he wanted it to work so that anybody could grab this book, follow through it with someone else. And as long as that person had the rudiments of reading, they could teach the person in front of them how to read. So there we've got that small one-room schoolhouse where you've got the 18-year-old girl from down the street who is teaching people at different levels, start at the front of the textbook, move through piece by piece. So not only are we learning by rote, but the structure of it is rote as well, right? So it allows anybody to be able to teach. It's an incredibly efficient way of bringing that kind of knowledge around. And you get to the 1840s and 1850s with somebody like Webster, who made a fortune by going around in the United States and selling these pre-scripted things with a couple of pretty pictures in them. And they were hugely valuable. They allowed people everywhere to learn. They could be sent, instead of sending Molin from 2,500 years ago, put him on a train and drive him around to places, you could take that, put it in a book, and just drive that book around. I mean, the efficiency gains are huge. And again, we see the technology underpinning what is possible, but we also see the technology underpinning what it means to know. Again, right? And this is, you're probably seeing the theme emerge here, but the technology, as it changes fundamentally what it means to be a knower inside of your society. And as we go now, we've got this is the Khan Academy. Now, instead of that one person who is on an island somewhere that I have to go and find, or that school that's centralized where there's one scroll that somebody's going to read from and I'm going to repeat, or even that one textbook that we need to organize to get on a train to get out to my small town. Instead of those, now we can reach out into the world and grab whatever we want, right? We have, for those of us who have internet connectivity, and of course that divide is still there, but for a vast number of humans, certainly more humans than have ever had access before, we have information abundance for the first time. And again, it fundamentally changes what it means to know. Simply remembering things is not nearly as valuable anymore. We don't need to pre-script all of this content, to do it ahead of time, to get it printed and sent out by train to get it out there, because now we can reach out and find that content at any time, at the time we need it, to do whatever we want with it. More importantly, to some degree, we can reach out for actual people again. So it's almost in a sense that we've come full circle. We can reach out to a human who may know, who's not on an island, may be on an island, it doesn't matter. I can reach out directly to all of you folks here and find out the thing that I need to know. Or better, reach out to 100 people, or 1,000 people, or 10,000, or 100,000. And we can all learn together. We don't need to have a pre-scripted curriculum. We don't need to have it written down. We don't need to find the one person who knows. Amongst the many, we can know. Right? So, inside of this, we find the MOOC. And this is very much goes back to the story of that first one where 2,300 of our friends showed up for a course. This huge thing happened where the many got together and learned together. There was some scripting involved in that, but the fact that we had access to all those people fundamentally changed it. Let's just walk through massive open online course. Can I just get a response in the chat room now? It's funny, this changes every 6 months or so. Is there anybody here who has not heard the word MOOC before? I asked that question in the negative. Have you heard of the word MOOC? So yes would be I have heard, no would mean I have not. So just give me a response in the chat room there. That's pretty good. For those of you who are listening in, we've got about, let's call it 60% of the people are familiar with it. I'm going to walk through a bit of an introduction to what the MOOC is, to give people a sense of at least what I mean about what I mean when I use the term, and then I'll get everybody on the same playing field here. Let's just go through the words one at a time. So it's massive, open online course. We look at the word massive. That's one of those things that's fundamentally a result of the internet. There's no way that you're getting the first of the big MOOCs at Stanford at 165,000 people in it. You are simply not going to get 165,000 people all interested in artificial intelligence into the same classroom. It's a fundamental difference that the internet brings to a scale. Totally changes when we bring the internet to bear. And it allows you not only scale in terms of numbers, but you scale culturally, you scale intellectually, you scale by knowledge, you scale in all kinds of different ways. So it's massive, not just in a big pile of numbers. I mean, if you have 100,000 people and nobody knows anything, that doesn't necessarily help you any. But in that first course, one of the examples I always think of, and this certainly fits well in a Second Life context as well, there's a guy in New Delhi who had joined the course, and in the midst of it, he had said, look, you guys are looking at this as such a North American perspective. Let me give you the perspective of education from where I'm from. And Biplab Bakshi is the man's name. He did a great job of providing a context that we never thought to include, that we didn't know anything about. And that's the beauty of it. Because the massiveness is not just about people, about numbers, it's also about variety, right? And there's something beautiful about that. Openness is something else that is made possible to some degree by the internet. And openness here, I think of it in two senses. In one sense, open in the sense of it being transparent. So you can get involved, you can help shape the curriculum, things are accessible. There's a lot of power in openness in that sense, and certainly in the sharing that's implied in that. The other kind of openness is about what the people in the United Kingdom call widening participation. That is, in your approach fundamentally being inclusive. So trying to bring people in, making it possible to access the conversation, even if you've never accessed it before. And that kind of widening participation, I think, is critical to allowing people to become members of any community. And certainly you see it, I've seen it here in being invited to speak and sort of being involved in the conversations with the people who are organizing this conference. There's a real community feel to it and a willingness to include rather than to define yourself by exclusion. So that openness has both of those meanings there. The onlineness, I mean, this may sound obvious, but I think it's an important point to pull out. Online not only means that we have this ability to connect, that we have this access to abundance, but it also means that the things that we're doing are tracked, that there are some facilities that allow us to pull together the content that various people are doing. So if you're using a tag or using Twitter, there's something about the math of the internet and the fact that we can track that math and pull it together automatically that gives us a lot of freedom, right? On the flip side of that, the math, and we'll talk about this in the context of xmoocs here in a second, the math also allows us to track individual people, know exactly what they're doing, and start to draw broad ideas about what it means to learn, how people are successful at learning, what kinds of connections they have. If you look at that chart that's there right now, that is a map of my Facebook account. And it shows the different kinds of connections. Each one of those colors reflects a group inside of my Facebook account. So the blue ones are the ones from my hometown. The green ones are the people from my high school, I think it is. The giant section on the left are my educational technology connections. And it shows the way they're interrelated and the way I relate to them. There's some powerful information available there. I'm going to give you a little side story to give you a sense of what I mean, some context. It's a story that came on the news here about 3 or 4 months ago in Canada, which is where I am in Canada. Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, in case you're wondering. Man walks into a Target store. For those of you who may not know, Target is like a department store. So he walks into the department store, and he walks up, this is a true story, he walks up to the manager and he says, "What are you guys doing? Why are you doing this to me?" And the manager, surprised, looks at him and says, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, well, you're sending all these coupons to my daughter as if she were pregnant. So, off baby food and diapers and this stuff. What are you trying to do? You're trying to encourage her to get pregnant? What are you guys doing? Manager apologizes. And the guy goes away. 3 days later, the manager follows up with the man and says, look, I just wanted to follow up, apologize again. Sorry this mistake has happened, sent to your daughter. And the guy says, well, actually, I should apologize to you. Turns out my daughter was actually pregnant. She just hadn't told anybody yet. The store, Target, has tracked everybody's purchases using their little client card and have drawn conclusions about what kinds of changes in purchases mean about that person. And they had mapped the changes in this young girl's purchases against somebody who has just become pregnant. Now, I don't know what it was, if she was buying more chocolate or what it was, but they're tracking individual actions of a person and then guessing things about them. And in this case, guessing correctly. If you take that and you apply it to education and the possibilities of it and the scariness of it from a flip side, this onlineness has some pretty profound implications. And certainly there are lots of people out there doing MOOCs who are looking at this very, very carefully and are trying to build educational products that help do the perfect learning, right? And I think that's an important point there too. And the last one is about it being a course. And when I coined the term in 2008, one of the first pieces of response I got back from people was, why are you saying course and not community? Shouldn't this just be a community? Shouldn't it be an ongoing thing? And the response to that is that creating a course specifically, saying we're going to do this for 10 weeks, is a very, very different activity than trying to build community. For those of you who've ever tried, building and sustaining community is an incredibly exhausting process. And it's a commitment to which people, they don't understand how much they're committing, till when they're committing. It's very difficult for people who are, let's say, 75% interested in a topic to want to join, because it's such an exhausting and such a consuming process to be a member of a community. Rewarding one, but it's a consuming one. With a course, you can commit to 10 weeks, know how much time that you're committing to it, and then allow that to live a reasonable space inside your life. Often communities form out of MOOCs, but having a course, having it structured in that way, really does allow for people to understand what they're doing. And I think that's really important. So I'm going to take a bit of a break there and see if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask. Feel free to drop those into the chat room and put those in there. And before we move on, I'm going to talk a little bit about xmoocs specifically, and then we'll move on from xmoocs, and then we'll start talking about community at the end as well. So we're moving on to, oops, that was the wrong way. Sorry. Need to go that way. So we're moving on to the xMOOC section. I was in the 2008 MOOC. Does that make me a relic? Yes, it totally makes you a relic. If you're here and you were in the 2008 MOOC, that makes you very old, and it makes you part of history, I would say. Oh, there are two people who were there. That's awesome. I don't think that the... Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions in here, and we're going to just keep on going. When you look at, I've just changed avatars. I'm now wearing, I've got a steampunk flower, essentially. For those of you who are not familiar with steampunk, the term, look around you. This beautiful venue that we're sitting in right now is built in a steampunk style. There's something beautiful about steampunk as a metaphor when we talk about education and technology, because steampunk is one of those, it's about that point where steam was just coming in, right? And there are people who hearken back to that point and imagine what the world would look like had we never discovered anything past steam. right? So how would it have evolved if we'd not gotten the gasoline engine and those other things? And there's this whole subculture out there. If you put steampunk into a browser, you'll see a lot of really great artwork, a lot of really great philosophy around it as well. But it's really about, it also has that cyborg feel to it, where it's a blend of the technical, of the technological, and the human, and that constant search for how much we use the technology and how much we need to use the humans. And I think for those of us who are involved in online learning, who are involved in using technology in education, who are involved in MOOCs, this is a constant question. How much of this should we turn over to the computers? How much of this is about us dealing with simple problems where we can just hand something over to a student, and how much of it requires us to remain embedded, deeply embedded as human beings inside of that process? And I really couldn't be in a better venue, I think, to talk about it than this one. So when you look at those xmoocs, and when people talk about it, there's a lot of different ways that people talk about MOOCs, but one of them is the distinctions between xmooc and cmooc. And xmooc is one that is broadly speaking provided by one of the big MOOC providers, by Coursera or edX or Udacity. More specifically in the way that I mean it, and I'm sorry I keep saying the way that I mean it or this person does, because there's really not any consensus on what these words mean right now, so I'm really giving you my vision of it. An xmooc is one that is far more computer-based, far more about this thing being true and me giving it to you, you watching a video and then going after the video and filling out a quiz, far more about that and far less about community. And there's a place for that too, right? Oh, that's the wrong. So I got two computers running. If you look at this first example, this is from the University of Edinburgh. It's an amazing MOOC. It was done by on educational cultures. Some really fantastic educators put together something on an xMOOC platform. It has 150 different resources from all over the open web pulled together. Could you have done this on your own, finding those open resources? Sure, but there's something really wonderful about somebody creating a space where you can come together and join in and find that and join in with others and go through that process with each other. And they had, I think it's 10,000 people in this course. Really excellent example of some of the possibilities that are there. This is on the Coursera platform. Really interesting course. If you look at this next one, this is more like what I mean of an xMOOC. This is Equine Digestive Anatomy. It's an equine nutrition course. I have to tell you, I did very, very badly at this course. I tried to go through it. I have the double problem of not caring a whole lot about horses and also not knowing very much about physiology. This quiz that you see up on the slide right now, it says how many incisors does a horse have? 12, 10, 14, 8, or 16. I think I actually tried this question 6 times. It shouldn't be possible to have to do it 6 times, but I think I actually forgot which answer I used the first time. But what you see here is very much a rote approach to the educational process. Very much, I have this knowledge, how many teeth are in that horse, let's count them now. It has, I still don't know the answer, you know that? I'm going to say 12 incisors. I really don't know. I tell you, I failed the course. What can I tell you? But the point of that is it's very much about simple things that are being told and having those simple things passed on to someone else in a way that they can check to see whether or not they've established those simple things. This is a MOOC that I ran. I don't know teeth, that's right. So I do apologize. That is a good point. Somebody did mention in the chat room, there may be horses in the audience. I meant no offense by my comments about horses. You're very, very fine creatures. I apologize. The second life, you just got to be careful about different things. You know what I'm saying? So this third MOOC is one that I ran. a couple of months ago. It's still sort of out there now. If you go to xpu.ca, you'll find it. Again, a good example of what you can do with the technology when it's automated. This was done in Facebook, and it's really about trying to get students ready for the basic things they need to understand about walking into university. So what's a syllabus? What's a student? What's a professor? Again, simple questions that we can answer that can be set up so that technology is checking out the answers. And let's look at a question here that came up. What's the role of virtual spaces in MOOCs? I'm going to address that question in just a moment. Thanks very much for asking it. I'll round it up at the end of this piece here. The fourth course that I'm going to, my flower is acting inappropriately, sorry. The fourth course that I want to talk about, and this is really the one that pulls the xMOOC example together. This is from the University of Lausanne. If anybody knows that school, it's a very well reputed school in Switzerland. To go with my Pestalozzi example earlier, ranked, I don't know, second or third in Europe. Dillenburg, the guy who runs this, Pierre Dillenburg, a fantastic educator, huge history in collaborative work. And in this case, when he comes to MOOCs, he doesn't look at them as a collaborative event and the stuff that they're doing. They use MOOCs, and particularly xmoocs at the University of Lausanne, in order to do remedial work. So if you've got somebody coming into first year physics and they need to learn how to do that thing over there, they need to understand the language, a MOOC that is powered by one of these question engines in the back that checks what you're doing and follows you along, like in that example with the Target girl earlier. There's something really, really effective about that, because lots of students, particularly those who need help, can use these kinds of systems, like they use the Khan Academy. For those of you who are not familiar, put Khan Academy into Google and you'll get a sense of the possibilities there as well. There are huge possibilities in this, and it's very important if you're looking at the term MOOC to understand that when 99% of people, 95% of people say MOOC, this is very much what they're talking about. They're talking about watch this video, do that assignment, do that test at the end, maybe get a credit, maybe don't, but it's very much about what I like to think of as simple information, okay? So when you look at this chart, when we break down the kinds of things that we want to know, this is a chart by Dave Snowden, the things that are simple respond to best practice. So there's a standard number of teeth, incisors inside of a horse. There is a syllabus is something that we can explain. It does a specific thing inside of a university context. The words that the person is learning in physics, I will not use a physics example because I will get it wrong, but somebody learning a physics thing, right? There are some basic concepts, some basic ideas about what you're going to learn that you need as foundational pieces. And I think the xMOOC and the hard technology, this mishmash of human and technology that happens inside of an xMOOC is really, really effective at doing these things. Unfortunately, for most of the things that we actually care about, the high end of knowing fits very much into that opposite box up there. It fits into the complex box. If you look at, my favorite example is when you look at a doctor, they learn the names of the bones and how they fit together and some of the surgery stuff. But the final part of the process is spending 2 years following around real doctors, quote unquote, and getting a sense of what it is like to be a member of the community of doctors. And I believe that this is true of most of the things that we find most important. So when we look at being parents, and we look at being, we look at things like cooking, right? Things we do every day. There's a point at which you can read a recipe and follow a recipe. And for those of you who have ever tried to make things like buns, you can follow the recipe and do a really bad job. There's a point beyond that. There's a point of feel, a point of knowing, a point of complexity. That is the thing that we're most interested in. It's the thing that is the most important. And it's not that the simple stuff doesn't exist. It's not that it's not important. It's not that that version of the MOOC doesn't have value. But there is something about it, frankly, for me, that's a bit spooky, that's a bit techie, that's a bit more like my flower here with the steam coming out the back of it, and less about being a human, less about complexity, and less about growing. So we're going to move on to the cmooc section, the stuff that maybe is more what I have done with MOOCs and the stuff that I think is important. And for that, we will have to do one more outfit change. Hopefully this one will go as well as the last one. So when we look, there he is. So feel free again to drop questions in. I'm going to answer the question from earlier. What's the role of virtual spaces in MOOCs? I think anytime you can have a sense of eventedness, and if you put eventedness into Google, you'll see the paper that we wrote about this in Virtual Worlds. Whenever you go to a space and it changes the way that you think, when you where it's an event where you have to adjust your thinking to get there, where you can create a sense of place, I think you add value to the educational process. And I don't care if that adding value is taking all of your friends and going to a pig farm, or if it's going into a virtual world. There's something about that change of space that I think is very interesting. And I think it provides a new way of thinking, a way to get outside maybe what we're doing, and to change the way that we look at things. If you see, as I do, learning as fundamentally a process of change, then having a new space makes that change a little bit easier to accomplish. So hopefully that addresses your question. Provides a new way of thinking. Okay, so if you look at the picture right now and you see my new avatar, I'm so glad my avatar changes have worked. Maybe we'll do a little happy avatar dance there. The animal that you're seeing on the slide flying by and then sitting here behind the projector is an Archaeopteryx. How many people know what an Archaeopteryx is? Anybody? Give us a yes, no. No? I do. Hooray! Archaeopteryx is a fascinating bird. And it is a bird, the world's first bird, supposedly. It's really the transition point between dinosaurs and flying birds as we know them. A lot of people would argue that dinosaurs are just a kind of bird anyway, or rather that birds are a kind of dinosaur. But the interesting thing, I better stop the dancing now. The interesting thing about, stop dancing, crazy avatar. There we go. The interesting thing about the Archaeopteryx, and I think where it fits in here as a metaphor, is that at the time that the Archaeopteryx was there, there's no real understanding that somehow it's going to be the first of this totally new way of surviving, of going out, of being part of the history of life. It's just another piece in the process, right? You've got something that's got maybe a few more feathers, maybe they're organized in just that way that allows it to fly. It still looks very, very much like the dinosaurs before it, like the theropods before it. It has 3 toes like all the other theropods. If you look at the difference between any of, like a velociraptor, the one that, Utah raptors, the ones that were so famous from Jurassic Park, they're very, very similar animals. But there's something about this one, in retrospect, that we see as transitional. The start of a new kind of thing. It's very, very difficult when you're in the midst of that change to understand how exactly that fundamental change is happening. And I would argue that the CMOOC, the things that we're doing here today, have a very good chance of being something that we look back at and see as that transitional moment. Not the fact that it's called a MOOC and the way that, not that, but the possibilities of returning to that Socratic moment, to that oral moment, to that human moment that Socrates thought was so important, and getting back there, being able to create this sense of space, this sense of place, virtually, of having a way to come together, not in 2s and 3s and 4s and 10s, but by thousands, right? And the possibilities there and the ways in which it allows us to look differently at the process of learning, look differently at what it means to know, right? Now, somebody sneezed. Okay, so when I look at this, I have this image that I use, a story that I use about the ways in which it changes what's possible. This is a rhizome. Rhizome's a way that plants spread and reproduce. Rhizomatic plants are funny. They aren't really a single plant. When you look at a tree, you cut the tree down, the bottom, it's dead, or broadly speaking, little shoots that come out. But it's a single entity. It grows from the bottom up, and it has one central sort of life force, and it's connected by roots and stuff, but it is one piece. You can get at the whole thing from one piece. If you're saying that you find rhizomes disturbing, I totally agree with you. I have a couple of rhizomes. The next slide has an example of one in my backyard, and I've had them at other houses before. They're incredibly they're difficult to stop. They're difficult to do really anything with, because you can't ever get at the plant, because it's not one thing. It's a many. They're aggressive, they're chaotic, they're resilient, they're difficult to contain, they follow their own paths, they make their own maps, and they are multiple. And when you think of that rhizome, and you think of that as a way of thinking versus a textbook. So take that textbook idea we talked about earlier. Think about that structure, that order, that organized, start from the beginning, move through to the end. Think about the way a lot of curriculum is structured now. A lot of the way we look at learning. So before this learning, we're going to create these learning objectives, and we're going to ensure that the 20 people in this room all leave here with a varying degree of measurements around whether or not they've achieved these objectives. That is a fundamental reflection of the way in which a book is structured, right? In order to organize things appropriately, now to some degree also in order to be able to charge people money appropriately, we've structured things in these incredibly rigid ways. When we look at the way that we learn online, the ways in which we can learn from each other, now whether that is over a lifetime, to use the cooking example again, if you went back in your head and tried to I'm sure you're all fantastic cooks. For those of you who are passionate about it or passionate about something else, replace the word cooking with the thing you love, and then try to map out the ways in which you learned, the way you got to where you are. There are bits and pieces and stutters and broken parts and things that you do and things you stop doing. There's all this stuff, but it's all growth and learning, and it all moves. Right? It's a very human way of thinking about the learning process. Because we have access to the content and the abundance on the internet, we can now take that approach to our learning far more broadly, right? You can take that rhizomatic approach to learning. Be the rhizome. So, let's assume for a second that you all agree with me. And right now I have the mic, so I can agree with myself, I guess. When we take that idea and we fundamentally change the reason why we're getting together to learn, and we think of ourselves in the learning process as aggressive and chaotic and resilient and difficult to contain, and we think of each learner making their own maps, right? And we take that to the learning process. There's some structure around that, around a MOOC, around lots and lots of people coming together in a community that I think is helpful. And this is something we wrote 3 years ago. If you put success in a MOOC into Google, you'll see the 4-minute video that describes this orient, declare, network, cluster, and focus business. But it is a way of maybe structuring an approach to MOOCs, to be able to get in there and allow yourself to become part of a discussion, to start mapping out your own things, where you don't have that structure that you had before, where what you're doing is coming together with a group of people to learn about things. The first step in that process is to orient yourself. Read the instructions, find out who the people are, and just get a sense. And I think for a lot of people, they skip this step. They hit something like a MOOC that's out there, they try to join, and they don't understand, and they leave right away. It's critical to give yourself the time and to realize that it's going to take time to understand the language that people are using, the way in which they use it. So the orient part of this is really about being patient and about giving yourself time to acclimate to the situation. Declaring is sort of the next step in the process. Once you've figured out who's there, what kind of tone people take, what kind of language people use. Finding a place that's your own, whether it's blogging or setting up a house inside Sacramento, whatever it is, a space that is yours that allows you to track your learning, to put the places, the things that you know in there, and allow you to share what you're doing with others. So that if somebody finds you, they can get some context about who you are, understand who you are, and find out whether or not you're one of those people that they're going to, whoa, we are missing a whole bunch of, okay, find out whether or not you're one of those people that they're going to be able to network with. And that idea of networking and of coming together as a group and going out and responding to people's blog posts and commenting on the work they're doing and engaging in the work that they're doing. There's something about that that's difficult for a lot of people because they don't see themselves in authority. They're not necessarily sure what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to do. They find people that maybe they don't like, people they don't want to interact with, people who don't think about things in the ways that they do. And that's where the clustering comes in. Because if you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of people, there's no need for you to talk to all of them. There's no reason why your way of doing things needs to mesh with every one of those people. And I don't mean necessarily people who agree with you, but people who are willing to work with you in ways that allow you to grow as a person, ways that allow you to focus on things. And that focus is, I think, the most important part about looking at doing a MOOC, looking at doing a CMOOC in particular, or connectivist, sorry, the C there stands for connectivist MOOC. You need to know why you're doing it. Because when we look at the learning process, when we look at the reasons why people learn, if the reason why you're learning is because I've told you C does not stand for Canadian, it could though, because there are lots of Canadians involved in it, but it's just a comment in the chat room there. So you need to know why you're doing it, and it has to be for you. It has to be something that you want to get out of it. It has to be something that you want to do, something that's important for you going forward. So that focus, that coming together with people and focusing on some kind of outcome that works for you is really important. You know, it's the thing that's going to make the difference between success and failure. Because if your idea of success is being told that you got a 92, you're not going to get that from a MOOC. Nobody's going to tell you did it the right way. You need to become that independent learner in a community of learning, right? So you need to understand why you're there. You don't need to understand right away, but at some point you need to get there and go, okay, now I understand what's going on. I have these people that I'm working with. Now I'm going to leverage this to do this thing over here. Now, whether it's something you want to understand or a paper you want to write or whatever it is, it has to be for you. I want to make some comments about that idea of network and how it ties together. When we think about network, often we look at it like this. If you look at this as a simple Google search for the word network, Google image search, those networks all have tidy little points and tidy little lines that connect to the other points. This is one of the influences of the technology, right? When you use a computer, you think of every node and every line as being connected. This may be the way the computers work, but I just don't believe that it's the way that humans work. I don't see us as a collection of tidy networks. Certainly, if I look inside of my own brain, I see a lot of different pieces in a lot of different places, right? I see ideas that contradict. You have beliefs that totally contradict the facts that you see in front of you. You can have multiple beliefs about the same things. And that's really the human process. That's what's inside of people's brains. And it's certainly the way that our connections are made. There are people that we learn from who, frankly, don't learn from us. These things are not equivalency relationships. They're messy. And, when you look out there, you have all these points of information. You have scattered all over the place, right? And these points of information they're not all single same-sized dots. Some of them are more important, and some of them are, they're of different value, different sizes. And they're not necessarily organized. They're all over the place, and, they cluster, and sometimes they're different kinds, and it's messy. And that's the downside of abundance. That textbook is super tidy and organized. The internet doesn't work that way. It's not structured like that. And not only that, but when we get into a classroom, we get into a learning place, we have some sets of learner, like our learner A here, who has some connections between different ideas and understands bits and pieces, has their own human experience, and you have somebody else, who has different ideas and different experiences, and frankly has different things that they're trying to learn and different things that they find important, right? And that's the reality of our learning, that's the reality of our communities, is that we bring in different ideas, we bring in different concepts, and as we move along, that map starts to build itself, right? We start to make our own maps. We start to build our own structures. We build these crazy, messy maps inside of our heads of the things we know. They combine with the things we knew before, and the people that we have met and the ideas we've connected to. That's the way my brain, at least, you'll see some of those lines don't even connect to facts. But if the lines are ideas and the points are facts, some of us have ideas that have no relationship to facts whatsoever, right? And that's okay. And it's okay to understand that we're all different in that process, because we do not need to be tied to the sameness, right? Our ideas do not need to be fundamentally structured in that way that the word was in that idea of 1000 AD. We don't need to structure it in the way that we did with the textbooks because of the problems we had moving that stuff around. We can leave that stuff alive. We can leave it in a way that allows for people to be different, right? Now, the first response, and maybe the biggest thing that underpins this, and what I hear all the time is, well, how are we going to measure that? Grumbles about certification standards. Exactly, right? How are we going to measure that? We need to measure that learning. We need to be able to say that this happened over here. We need to be able to prove people that they're getting their money's worth. We need to be able to measure learning. And I totally understand that you need to be able to measure learning. I totally understand that. But the problem is, the fundamental problem with that is you can't. You can measure the fact that somebody is able to repeat something that you said to them. You can measure as a human whether or not the person in front of you probably understands or not. But in terms of the strict measurements that we all have created as beliefs about learning, I fundamentally don't believe that it's possible. And that what we end up doing is breaking the learning process, putting it back into a box so we can tell whether or not somebody has learned. So for those of you who go out onto the internet on your own and learn random stuff, we don't think of it as learning because it hasn't been rubber stamped by some kind of structure. And I think maybe the most important lesson that the MOOC brings to us and the possibilities of it is that we can totally leave that behind, right? We can stop measuring learning, and we can just go ahead and learn, right? We can just learn, and we can just do that together. And I think that the opening that we have right now, the archaeopteryx that's out there, is that suddenly we can all get together. We have access to all the things we need, and we have access to each other. We can go out there and learn together without somebody telling us that we've done it the right way. Thanks.